Stargazers, Alissandra Coffey reporting to you again with part two of the mystery reveal or the mystery guest. So, as I mentioned yesterday, we did come down to a couple of technical difficulties, and again, my apologies about that. I also wanted to send out a nice shout out to those who watched my video yesterday and had sent some really positive comments. I am really, really, really very thankful to you. Thank you for the positive comments and also for putting up with me, knowing that there were some technical difficulties there. I just say blame it on a late Gen Xer to early millennial in bopping around with technology and trying to become a little less technologically illiterate, let's just say. But anyway, let's go ahead and dive back into our mystery guest. So if you had missed my vlog or my cast yesterday, when it came down to the mystery guest, I'm going to just go ahead and go forward and reveal. It is on James McAvoy's natal chart. If you would like to gain some additional clues or would like to take a look at what I had mentioned yesterday when it came to the beginnings of his chart, feel free to take a look at the first video as well too. And it's kind of interesting. Yeah, Mr. McAvoy definitely has a lot of things going on in his chart. Okay. So I think where we left off yesterday, and again, if I'm looking down, it's just because Mr. McAvoy has a load of aspects in his chart. I had to actually bullet point a couple of ideas, so I'm referring to my notes again today. But one thing where I think we left off was where we were discussing how Mr. McAvoy has Jupiter in the 10th house of his chart, and that it is trined Mercury, and the meaning of that when it comes down to his career and when it comes down to like who he is as well. What I see with Jupiter in the 10th house is that is a huge, wonderful planet to have in that 10th house. This guy definitely has quite a bit of a 10th house, I have to say. He definitely has a lot of expansive ideas when it comes to his career, is what I see. And when I say expansive ideas, I mean these are ideas that not only encompass the immediate reality that he's within, but also the future. It's like your big picture ideas is what Jupiter carries with it. It also carries the consideration of luck. Now, for Mr. McAvoy, when it has come down to acting, he's had a tremendous amount of luck. That's obviously indicated with Jupiter in the 10th house. But I also see that when he does come to the table with his character, he comes to the table with not only the preparation that he's made, but also some ideas, like further ideas of, okay, if I do this, how will this impact production? And how could this speed up production and maybe speed up filming as well too? Or if I portray my character this way, will it, expand upon the plot line as well too? So I feel like he makes some really careful and very smart decisions, or he comes to the table with very smart decisions. And to trine it with Mercury, that's where I see that aspect as, as opposed to just having big picture ideas and that's it. Sometimes big picture ideas are not always very practical, or they're very large and they're very hard to scale. Mr. McAvoy knows how to take these big picture ideas and make them a reality for him, whether that be in his career or also in his everyday life. I'm sorry, but I don't know if Mr. McAvoy is a producer as of yet. But my prediction, if I'm allowed to give a little bit of a prediction with the natal chart, is I'm seeing in Mr. McAvoy's chart that he might become a producer sometime in the near future. I'm thinking that may be a very wonderful possibility. Producers, of course, are known for taking very small material, such as a script or something very idealized, and not only seeing the bigger picture with that production, but also making that production the reality as well too, and possibly making it a reality very proactively and very constructively as well too. So I would take a look at some of the credits when it comes down to Mr. McAvoy's future projects here and there, and maybe I'm thinking we might see his name with either executive producer next to it, or if not, flat out producer next to it. I'm really seeing that happening sometime soon. The other thing that I actually forgot to mention yesterday, I mentioned Neptune yesterday. And, there was, again, there's his trine with Neptune when it comes to Mars. And I thought I would actually point that out because this definitely does really accentuate his character. Not only does this trine, so many astrologers state that this trine makes somebody very appealing because Neptune is also that planet of, while it's idealized, many people who have many good aspects going to that planet are also seen as being very attractive. So this is another aspect where it kind of adds to the allure of Mr. McAvoy. I'd say the allure with Neptune and Mars is that he definitely comes across as the dreamy romantic hero and possibly a swashbuckler as well too. That's what I usually see as the attraction with men. With women who usually have this trine, I would say they're the heroine, like the strong heroine, maybe a heroine that you'd normally would see in a romantic comedy is what I usually see within this. But for Mr. McAvoy, the swashbuckling hero is definitely the allure with him, and that I think definitely emphasizes that allure. What is also interesting, and I've also kind of gathered around other astrologers when it has come down to this trine. Little secret, the way that we astrologers do that is by looking at different resources there. But with the resources that I've looked at, it also pointed towards philanthropy. So, like giving back. And I think that really resounds with Mr. McAvoy in the regard of his recent stunt at this point, or I don't want to say stunt, but his recent act, charitable act, which was to help fund those companies who are making or trying to make PPE for healthcare workers and funding it so that they can expedite the process and make that situation become a reality. With the philanthropy in mind, that just also shows with Mr. McAvoy that he does have a really big heart. It might not come across a lot of the time, again, as I mentioned yesterday, with Saturn trined his sun's position, he comes across as very aloof, kind of cold at times. With that Pluto position in the first house as well, he can come across as a little intimidating, I would have to say, because he's very, very powerful. But underneath it all, and I also can say when it comes down to Taurus, Taurus can have a very gruff exterior, but underneath all of that, it just goes to show he has a very deep and big and wonderful heart inside all of that. So it's not all about appearances. The other thing that I thought I would share is that this is the point in many people's charts where I come up to the advice column, so to speak. So while we have all these lovely trines in Mr. McAvoy's chart, and all these lovely semi-sextiles, and some, actually, I have to say, really some wonderful conjunctions, especially like with Mercury and Venus, his placements there. We all have in astrology the nice aspects, but we also have the hard aspects. And that just goes to show how astrology, as within life, we have our good selves, and then we also have our shadow selves. And those squares, oppositions, and also hard conjunctions really reemphasize what those hard aspects in life, what our shadow selves could be, but also what we can do to become better people at the end of the day, or to become a little more mindful, possibly, of our weaknesses or our pitfalls so that we become a better person. What I see with Mr. McAvoy, so the things to watch out for, and this is kind of like my advice part of this cast. So again, I looked at his Mars placement in his 7th house. Knowing that Mars is within Aries and also in the 7th house, the first thing that really came to mind, and sometimes astrology nerds and astrologers are very intuitive as well too, but the first thing that really I could hear resonating through my head was hot-headed. Hot-headed, ill-tempered, very impulsive. And I would just say possibly hot-headed when it comes down to the patience level, and also when it comes down to maybe faux pas that fans may give to him when he's on the red carpet. Maybe hot-headed and ill-tempered when it comes down to annoyances from family members. And just also in general, just if things don't go his way necessarily, he has that propensity to be a little hot-headed, ill-tempered. And especially his Mars position being opposed to Pluto. What I always just say is, since his Mars position is also near Mercury, I just advise him be very careful that if you're dealing with, like, say, that obnoxious heckler that's on the red carpet, and many an actor knows what I'm talking about here. Also, many who are in the performing arts know who I'm talking about here. Those people who are big about booing and hissing or making inappropriate comments and being rude. What I recommend is that just to make sure that he handles the situation in a dignified manner, making sure that he's not meeting the heckler with barbed words as well, or meeting a tense situation with words that cannot be taken back. I have an ill-affected 3rd house myself, so I do have a little bit of mind when I do say this, and I do have a little bit of experience when I say this. I always think of things that are being said as ringing a bell. Just make sure that when you ring that bell, that's positive, that it chimes very positively, because you can't always unring the bell when you say something negatively. And that especially seems true and it's not just it seems true, it becomes true with family members and people who are near and dear to you as well. Speaking of Mars opposed Pluto, while many astrologers say that ups a person's sex appeal, I look at it as accident prone. Now, we all know Mr. McAvoy. I have to refer to It Chapter 2. What happened to him last year? The accident prone in Mr. McAvoy's chart is more likely with stunts that really could be referred to stunt men. I think with It Chapter 2, he ended up with tendinitis in his thighs and his knees. Okay, speaking from somebody who has had to deal with tendinitis in the last year in my peroneal tendon of my ankle, ouch, man! Oh my goodness, ouch! That's where I say, definitely some of those stunts. I know actors love to be really impressive when it comes to their own stunts on set, but for Mr. McAvoy, please, 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 because you're very accident prone already, and it looks like in your chart that's very apparent in, you're prone to having injuries as well too. Utilize that stunt man. It's not faux pas. I mean, as a fan, somebody who loves your work as well, or as somebody who watches your films, I'd rather see a safe and see you injured, and that kind of made me a little sad last year that he was undergoing an injury. I think I saw his Instagram page where he was rocking out the ice packs on his thighs and on his knees, and that I'm sorry that there's you don't need to go through pain in order to accomplish a character. It's just not necessary, not at all. No. So use those stunt men. I urge you. I please urge of you, because I'd like to see more of you and your work, and I'd love to see you continue to work in the near future. And I don't want to just say this as a fan, but just as somebody who loves movies in general. I would, Mr. McAvoy, if you're listening, I'd really love to see you continue to work. So be careful out there. My goodness. My goodness, my goodness. There was also in his chart what became very apparent was Mercury and Venus squared Neptune. Now, while this is a very mild square, because, Venus actually lightens the square, or kind of softens the square. It's very much the same with Jupiter as well, too. I still have to point this out because I have a very similar aspect in my chart. And I just find that sometimes when I have something that's of like, I like to share some advice of what's worked for me, because that might also help those who might have similar aspects in their chart or might have similar inclinations. Mercury and Venus squared Neptune usually means that because Neptune is that of the romantic planet as well as the social planet, and Neptune is that of dreams and ideals. Pair that with Mercury. Mr. McAvoy has a tendency of idealizing lovers, or maybe just idealizing people in general. Now I can back this up with, when you look at his wife, his past wife, Anne-Marie Duff, who coincidentally is actually a Libran. I kind of found that to be interesting, another Venus-inspired individual. But being Venus-inspired, she was very, very, very pretty and very beautiful. And you look at his current, now I've heard some of the news that I guess it's his current wife who worked for M. Night Shyamalan, possibly still does. She's also very striking, very gorgeous, very pretty. Now, I point this out in the idealized department of, I could just see with Mr. McAvoy saying, well, being a typical Taurus, or being a little bit of a Taurian man, saying, well, this girl looks really, really, really pretty. She's probably going to look really great on my arm. Or this girl really strikes me as being really very steadfast and very, focused and disciplined. She'll look really good next to me, especially when those cameras go off with the paparazzi. What I always warn against when it comes down to those sort of tendencies is, first off, you're not looking at the full character of someone. And I also get the feeling with Mr. McAvoy, he jumps towards a pretty face. Now, who wouldn't? I think that's kind of human nature. However, when I see idealized notions in a chart, or idealized tendencies, this person tends to think that because this person has a pretty face, this person can't go wrong. And that's where that could be very dangerous, because it could lead to devastating, and I mean devastating, heartbreak. It blinds you to who this person could really be, and also their pitfalls. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I do have experience with this. I have a very similar aspect in my chart when it comes to Neptune. One thing I can recommend to Mr. McAvoy and anybody who has either Neptune in, like, say, the 5th house, the 7th house, or something very similar to Mr. McAvoy where it is Venus squared Neptune, and if Mercury is also involved with this as well, this sort of aspect. I just say, when you love somebody, write that person's name down in a private journal. So just make sure that you have like a private journal where obviously that significant other can't see it. That's going to be key and critical right there. And then write down that person's name and T chart. So with the T chart, the one side is what works for this person. So what do you love about this person? So in the case like with Anne-Marie Duff, she's very pretty. She's very beautiful. She's very loving as a mother. She seems like she's a very caring and loving individual. But then here comes the other side of that T chart. What doesn't work? So things like that could be, well, she gets into a rage really quickly. Or it doesn't take so much to let her get into road rage here. She gets into road rage very easily. Well, she has a tendency to talk down to me, or she has a tendency to make very barbed words, or she has this tendency to bring out this in me. I like this exercise as somebody who also idealizes partners in the regard that it really causes you to step back from the fantasy and actually take a look at reality and kind of give yourself a more level playing field when it comes to love and matters of the heart. Because I know that's the trickiest area where we can see everything fairly and justly, and also see everything truthfully as well too. And I find that list, I had to do that with my past lovers. It's usually something that's recommended for 30-somethings who are single and who are looking to date. Make a list of your past lovers and what worked and what didn't, and to see certain patterns as to what might have happened within those relationships. But it was very interesting how many of my personal relationships, and I mean, shame on me for saying this, but it was interesting how many were, well, I liked him because he was attractive, or I liked him because there was, quote unquote, chemistry going on, or I liked him because I thought that we were intellectually matched, or what have you. And it was just very fascinating how it was all driven by outward appearances and things that could easily deceive. It wasn't surprising to me that most of those relationships ended in disaster because of that tendency of, well, I'm just seeing that he's very attractive, or I'm seeing that we have chemistry and that's it. And I'm not seeing whether or not I actually like the person, or whether or not this person has more substance. And I feel like this exercise in my past loves could have been very beneficial. It's definitely been very beneficial to me, especially since I've had, well, with Venus retrograde, I've had a past lover kind of get in touch with me. So that's been very interesting as well. But definitely for Mr. McAvoy, especially since he's such a high-profile person, try that exercise is what I would say to him, and see if he could see his latest partner in a much more thoughtful and even light. Now, not to say that, I'm not breaking up a marriage here. Not at all. No. I'm just saying, make sure that you know your partner well. It's a great way of knowing your partner fully, and without having that lead to just the surface appearances. So other things, there are just a couple of other things that I saw in James McAvoy's chart that were very interesting, but of things to watch out for. So there was the Sun square Jupiter. So we mentioned a lot about how he has a lot of great fortune in his career. He has a lot of big picture ideas when it comes to his acting career, and again, potential producing career. I'm really banking on that one. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say I think producer's gonna be in his title at some point. Pardon me. But with the Sun square Jupiter, a lot of astrologers look at this, and they look at Jupiter as also being that planet of luck. So what they usually say is, well, this guy naturally has a lot of luck. It's a part of his personality, but unfortunately with that luck, Lady Luck runs fickle, and sometimes Lady Luck runs out. and then that person is kind of swamped, and kind of left out on a limb when Lady Luck runs out. What I also have seen with Sun Square Jupiter was, again, the planet of expansion being the planet of expansion being so close, or being really not getting along with your personal planet being that of the sun, that of the ego, and that of the self. I saw lots of expansion, lots of ideas, but possibly being overwhelmed. I don't know if anyone's ever had this moment where you get these like big ideas coming towards you all at once and you just don't know what to do when it comes to them. And I get that feeling that's probably what Mr. McAvoy deals with when it comes to this square. He probably deals with it on a regular basis, where it's like, oh my God, there's some ideas that are wonderful and that are really creative, but oh my God, slow the idea train for me for just one moment. I'm overwhelmed. Or that overwhelmed could be, I have so many ideas, I don't know where to put this idea, and it might go unexpressed, as what we usually tend to do. Either we get overwhelmed, like, no! Or we get overwhelmed, or when we get overwhelmed, it's just secretly, okay, these things, I don't think these ideas are going to work, so we shove them under the carpet. Again, what I usually just say is, so don't be blind. So with Mr. McAvoy, what I would probably recommend to him, and I think he's already learned his lesson when it comes down to luck. I think that he's had a lot of luck, especially early in his career, and he's chosen roles a couple of times where they weren't the best. I mean, he had every best intention in mind for it, but the movie just wasn't of the best interest. And I would say that's probably a good example of Jupiter squared the sun, where like your misfortune is blindsiding you. So again, don't rely too much on luck. I know that's easier said than done. I mean, don't just rely on chance or fate. I always just say, before you start a project, make sure that you know everything involved. And this also goes for anybody who has a similar aspect in their chart, or who might be finding something similar. If you find that you have a lot of luck in life, try not to rely too heavily on that, and try to, again, glean all the particulars about a project before signing on, because sometimes when we rely on luck, we get, like I said, we get a little blindsided, or, once everything's going our way for a while, we get a little blindsided, and we don't always take a look at that one particular little nagging detail that we find out later on. But we didn't address it in that moment. And again, it's good to have a full picture of a scale. Also, with the lots of expansion, what I just usually say, if you have a lot of expanded ideas, what has also helped me, because I think this had to do with a lot of transits in my chart for myself, where I just had like overwhelming overflow of expansive ideas. For me, I usually just start to keep a journal, and that's where in my journal I just say ideas, whether or not they're carried out, and I just list them. And even if they, especially if they seem like way too big that I can't really accomplish them, or they seem way too fanciful, at least they're just written down in a journal. The worst crime is that they're written down in a journal. But sometimes those big fanciful ideas can lead to more practical ideas in the future, especially if they're like overwhelming ideas as well. What might be overwhelming now could be very bankable and very practical in the future. So it's good to keep that journal. That way you kind of time stamp it, you kind of date stamp it, and then you can kind of revisit it as well too. Just in case you don't know a little bit about me, I'm big about journaling, and I'm big about keeping journals and being introspective, or being self-accountable as well too. Those are like my big things whenever I give any sort of advice when it comes to astrology as well. And I think we're coming close to the end here. Yes, we are. So with there's just only two more aspects that I can just see with Mr. McAvoy. So there's Uranus in the second house, And then I also have to bookend it with Pluto in the first. So Uranus in the second house, I don't have usually a problem with Uranus, and probably because I haven't had much of a situation. I think it's because it's primarily in one of my most notable spots in my chart and everything. But I know traditionally astrologers ascribe or say that this planet is that of, it could be of erraticism, it also could be of rebelliousness. If we take a look at Aquarius, its ruler, you see there's a lot of logic, testing of trial and error, scientific testing as well too. Sometimes Aquarians can be kind of like those mad scientists where they like to test something, but they kind of miss out on how it actually affects human beings or how it actually affects other people in the long run. So that's one aspect of Uranus. Normally, when Uranus has been of a great aspect in any sort of social impetus, so like I think 2006, it was in a very exalted position in the sky. That's where we start to see iPods, where we start to see iPhones come out. So a lot related to technology. I'm also thinking, Age of Aquarius might lend more to technology, possibly to AI, but that's a different subject for a different vlog or a different video cast. With James McAvoy, though, with Uranus being in the second house, what I just usually say is while he can be very experimental when it comes to funds, I just warn him against being rebellious when it comes to funds. I think the last time that I saw this aspect in somebody's house, I think it was Kate Winslet's chart, where I could just see her say, "Well, I'll just spend my money however I want to, gosh darn it." And I think I'm seeing the same thing with James McAvoy. And I just warn against that because if you spend it however you want it and you get like these erratic shopping sprees, I think that's just as bad as having, a bill come in the mail that demands a lot of your money. Or, spending on something that's not really needed as well too. Or just erratically spending just to erratically spend and make a point, and then coming home the next day and going, "Oy vey, ay, 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 what the heck did I do? What the heck did I do? Why did I spend on this?" So I just definitely say when it comes to material possessions and money matters, just be very careful on those purse strings. Maybe keep a tight purse string, especially if you're feeling a little, as I said, a little rebellious, or if you're kind of in a bad mood and feeling that rebellion coming on. Just keep a tight aim on those purse strings. If you want to spend for the heck of spending it because it's your money, well, good for you. But I would also say maybe make a budget so that you're not overspending, and also gaining a lot of stuff as well. And then lastly, there's Pluto in the first house. I just warn people who have Pluto in predominant positions, such as the first house. So first house is that of ego and that of self, kind of like with your sun, in your sun's position. It is ruled by Aries, but what I would just say with Pluto is just make sure that, with Mr. McAvoy, I just say just make sure that there aren't any excessive power plays, that you're not trying to dominate people, especially when you're in a bad mood, that you're not trying to sway people to just take your position and only your position only. As I said, the positive aspect of Pluto can be very transformative, both inward and outward. You can self-transform to becoming a better person. The drawback, unfortunately, is you can alienate and try to want to dominate people, knowing that it's also the planet of power, as well as the planet, as we mentioned earlier with Scorpio, the planet of probing and probing and probing until we get down to the very nitty-gritty truth. And sometimes people don't always like to hear the nitty-gritty truth, or sometimes you might not be able to hear the nitty-gritty truth. Other astrologers have also mentioned that it could be, rough childhood, a rough early start in life, that you're also still trying to overcome, And again, I just say that transformative aspect of Pluto, when it comes down to that, can be very helpful in dealing with those issues honestly and realistically, but also creatively, to where you're not only bringing up that Hydra, but you're shining the light on it, and you're turning that monster into a wonderful jewel, which is kind of a theme with Pluto. And I think that's also a dominant theme with Mr. McAvoy, when it comes down to Pluto in the first house. Overall, though, Mr. McAvoy, I believe, has a very lovely character. He is very intriguing. I've actually been very impressed with his choice of roles. I mean, I'm sorry, from the Beast in Glass to Billy in It Chapter 2 to Professor X in X-Men, the Dark Phoenix, the last of the trilogy. I think as of right now, I'm not so sure as to what he's coming up with. I think there was like his Material Things, I believe it was, and his character there. But I'm always looking forward to seeing what else he comes up with. And Mr. McAvoy, if you are watching, your chart was very wonderful and very interesting to look at. And I am very excited to see what you're coming up with when it comes to your recent productions, as well as with your recent roles. For those who have been watching as well, how do you think? Does it sound like Mr. McAvoy? Does it sound kind of interesting? Were there things that were kind of enlightening about this cast? I have to say, as a astrology nerd, it was kind of interesting diving into Mr. McAvoy's chart. But I'd love to hear your comments as well too. So feel free to give me a comment. If you are in favor of my video cast here, definitely give me a thumbs up. Yeah. And I know that I guess there is a subscribe button at the bottom, so definitely do subscribe. And as I said yesterday, you can also find my blog at everydayastrologer.blogspot.com. So don't go to the @blogspot, as I said yesterday. It's everydayastrologer.blogspot.com. I know I made that mistake yesterday. But I would love to welcome you as a guest. I would love to see what you have as opinion-wise, or, love to see your comments on that page as well, too. So, as I always sign off, dear stargazers, always continue to look up at the stars. Apparently last night, I think Jupiter was still in the heavens, so don't forget to look at that. The new moon is starting to make a crescent, so we're starting to see the crescent moon, which has been, like last night, it was very, very, very pretty. And I think that Saturn is also still close to the planet, so go out there if you can, or if you have a window that faces west, definitely take a look up and take a pause and take a look up at the sky a little bit there, and you could definitely see Jupiter and Saturn in action. And until then, please take good care of yourselves, and hopefully I will see you again on the next video cast. All right, take care all, and bless everybody, and have a wonderful, lovely day.